Nobody will ever love you because you're fat, her cruel sister said, but the mountain man whispered, you're my everything. Look at what you've done. Isabella Hartwell's shriek split the wedding hall like a whip crack. The music died, laughter froze, and all eyes turned to the bride, her white gown now streaked with red wine. Charlotte Lottie Hartwell stood paralyzed, the empty glass still trembling in her hand. She had stumbled while trying to slip unnoticed through the crowd, and in one awful second the accident had destroyed her sister's perfect moment. Before she could stammer an apology, Isabella spun on her, fury burning in her painted face. You ruin everything, Charlotte. Always have, always will. Her voice climbed higher, crueler, echoing through the grand hall. And do you know why? Because no one could ever love you, not now, not ever. You're nothing but a fat little burden, and you'll die that way, alone. A gasp rippled across the room. Guests whispered behind gloved hands. Some laughed outright, their pity as sharp as daggers. Lottie's cheeks blazed scarlet, tears blurring her vision. She turned and fled, past the tables, past the orchestra, past the open doors where winter wind bit her skin. She didn't stop to grab her cloak, didn't hear the gasps trailing behind her. Her sister's words clung to her like chains, each syllable hammering the same brutal truth she had always feared. Nobody will ever love you because you're fat. That night, while laughter and music returned to the hall behind her, Lottie packed a small bundle of clothes, left a note on the kitchen table, and walked into the dark. Her footsteps carried her toward the black silhouette of the mountains, toward the unknown, toward a fate she thought might be no kinder than her sister's curse. But fate had other plans. Charlotte Lottie Hartwell had always lived in the shadow of her sister's beauty. Where Isabella's dark curls and slim waistline drew every eye, Lottie's soft curves and quiet manner drew only whispers. At 22, she had learned to keep her head bowed, her voice low, her presence small. Yet nothing prepared her for the sting of Isabella's words that night, words sharpened not by strangers, but by blood. Her flight from the wedding hall felt endless. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, melted down her cheeks with her tears. By the time she reached the Hartwell house on the edge of town, her dress hem was soaked, her shoes heavy with mud. She didn't stop to rest. She gathered what little she could, an extra shawl, her mother's worn Bible, a loaf of bread, and tied it into a bundle. She left no farewell, but a single note. I cannot stay where I am unwanted. When dawn broke, the town of Willow Creek lay far behind her. The narrow road turned upward, winding into the foothills of Blackstone Mountain. Folks whispered about the man who lived there, Thaddeus Blackwood, a former Army doctor who had vanished after the war. Some called him mad, others dangerous. Children dared each other to follow the trail until the trees grew too thick and fear turned them back. But to Lottie, the mountain meant escape. Escape from her sister's sneer, from the laughter of strangers, from a lifetime of being told she was too much and never enough. Each step was heavy, but the weight inside her chest was heavier still. By midday, the cold gnawed at her bones. The bread was gone, her shawl threadbare against the wind. She stumbled near a frozen stream, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her sister's voice echoed in her ears. No one will ever love you. The words pressed harder than the hunger in her belly, and at last she collapsed onto the snow. When she woke, she thought she was dreaming. A man crouched beside her, his face half hidden by a scarf and the shadow of his broad hat. He smelled faintly of pine and smoke, his coat lined with fur, his gloved hands rough but careful as they pressed a canteen to her lips. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low, steady. "Drink." Water trickled down her throat, cool and sharp. She coughed, then blinked up into eyes the color of warm earth. "You'll freeze out here," he said, scanning her bundle, her worn shoes, her pale face. "Where are you headed?" Lottie's lips parted, but no words came. Shame burned her throat. How could she explain that she had run not from danger, but from the cruelty of her own kin? She shook her head, silent. The man studied her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her as though she weighed no more than a child. Her heart pounded. She whispered hoarsely, "Please, I don't want to be a burden." The man's gaze flicked down to her unreadable, but his arms tightened ever so slightly, shielding her against the cold. "You're not," he said simply. As he carried her into the forest, Lottie let her eyes close once more. Somewhere between waking and sleep, one thought flickered. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had not been cursed to walk this world unloved. For the first time, doubt and hope tangled together in her chest, and the mountain man carried her higher. The rhythm of hoofbeats was the first thing Lottie noticed when she drifted back to consciousness. Beneath her, the sway of a saddle rocked her like a cradle. She realized with a start that she was pressed against the broad chest of the man who had found her. His coat enveloped her, warm with the lingering scent of cedar smoke. "Rest," he said, his voice rumbling low above her head. "We've a ways to go." She obeyed, too weak to argue. Her mind buzzed with questions. Who was he? Where was he taking her? Why was he helping her? But exhaustion weighed her down. For once, she let someone else bear her burden. As daylight deepened, the forest closed in. Pines towered overhead, their branches heavy with snow. A creek wound through the valley, its waters rimmed with ice. Ravens cut across the sky, their cries sharp against the silence. Lottie shivered. The mountains were beautiful, yes, but wild, unforgiving. If this man meant her harm, no one would ever find her here. Her fear must have shown because he spoke without looking down. "My name's Thaddeus Blackwood. Most just call me Thad." She blinked up at him. "Lottie," she whispered, her voice faint. "Charlotte Hartwell." He gave a short nod as though committing her name to memory. "You're safe now, Lottie. I'll see you through." The word struck something deep inside her, something tender and bruised. Safe. She hadn't felt safe in years, not in her sister's house, not in the town where laughter followed her like a shadow. Could he mean it? Could a stranger's promise outweigh the curses of her own blood? By dusk, the cold gnawed through her shawl again. Thad reined the horse into a sheltered hollow where an overhang of rock shielded the snow. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, then reached up to lift her down. His hands were strong, steady, but startlingly gentle as he set her on her feet. Her legs buckled. She would have fallen if his arm hadn't caught her waist. She stiffened at the touch, embarrassment flooding her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm too heavy." For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. "Don't apologize for being alive," he said evenly. "The mountain doesn't care what size you are. Neither do I." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but Isabella's voice rang in her ears. "No one will ever love you." She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Thad didn't push her. He guided her to a fallen log, then set about building a fire. His movements were efficient, practiced. The scrape of flint, the curl of smoke, the crackle of kindling. Soon flames leapt, casting warmth against the encroaching night. From his pack he drew a small tin pot, filling it with snow and placing it over the fire until it melted. He added strips of dried meat and herbs, and the smell of broth soon filled the air. Lottie's stomach twisted with hunger, but she hesitated. In her childhood, she had often been mocked for eating too heartily. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to appear indifferent. But when Thad ladled the steaming broth into a cup and pressed it into her hands, he said only, "Eat. You need strength." His tone held no judgment, no pity, only quiet insistence. Her fingers tightened around the tin. She sipped, and warmth spread through her chest. Tears pricked her eyes, though she hid them behind lowered lashes. They ate in silence, broken only by the pop of the fire and the distant howl of a wolf. When the meal was done, Thad rolled out 2 bedrolls, one near the flames, one several paces away. "You'll take the warm spot," he said simply. Lottie swallowed hard, unused to such consideration. "And you?" "I've slept colder nights." He stretched his long frame out on the farther bedroll, resting his rifle within arm's reach. "Rest easy. Nothing will touch you while I'm here." Lottie lay back on the furs, staring at the firelight dancing on the rocks. For the first time since her sister's curse, she felt a flicker of doubt, not in herself, but in Isabella's words. Maybe, just maybe, someone could care for her after all. When Lottie woke the next morning, sunlight poured pale and golden across the clearing. Thad was already up, tending to the fire with movements as steady as the rhythm of the forest itself. For a moment she lay still, wrapped in his heavy coat, wondering if the night before had been a dream. But the warmth of the flames, the smell of smoke, and the faint ache in her limbs told her it had all been real. After a quick breakfast of porridge and dried berries, they mounted his horse again and continued climbing. By midday, the trees thinned, revealing a hidden valley where a cabin nestled against the slope of Blackstone Mountain. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the sky. "This is home," Thad said simply, dismounting to open the gate of a small fence. Lottie blinked. The cabin was modest, rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, shutters secured against the wind, and a porch lined with wood piles. But it looked sturdy, lived in, touched by care. Around it, a garden lay dormant under snow, and a chicken coop stood nearby, feathers caught in the slats. Inside, the cabin was warmer still. A wide stone fireplace dominated the main room, its mantel lined with jars of herbs and bundles of dried flowers. A sturdy table bore the marks of knives and spilled ink, and shelves of books leaned against the wall. Against the far side stood a bed piled with furs, and beside it a second cot, neatly made. Lottie lingered near the door, afraid of taking up too much space, but Thad glanced back and said, "Set your bundle down. You'll stay here until you've decided where you want to go." Her throat tightened. No one had ever given her such a choice. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. Thad spent mornings outside, splitting wood, checking snares, or tending the coop, while Lottie busied herself with small tasks she had always been told were clumsy, sweeping the floor, mending a torn shirt, stirring a pot of stew. She braced for criticism, but none came. When she burned the bread one afternoon, cheeks burning with shame, Thad tasted it and shrugged. "Still good." and that was the end of it. At meals, he always made sure she ate first. When she offered him the larger portion, he shook his head. "You need it more than I do." When her hands fumbled with the axe as she tried to split kindling, he guided her grip, his large hands covering hers until the motion felt natural. "Don't fight the wood," he told her. "Let the grain show you where to strike." She laughed at herself, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel out of place. Evenings by the fire became their sanctuary. Lottie would hum softly, old hymns or lullabies she half remembered from childhood. Thad never interrupted, only leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, as though her voice was a balm he hadn't known he needed. Once, when she faltered, embarrassed, he said quietly, "Don't stop. It's been a long time since there's been music here." She began to notice small things, how he set his boots neatly by the door, how he spoke little but always listened, how he placed a second mug of tea beside her without asking if she wanted it. And slowly, the belief hammered into her by her sister began to crack. One night, snow hissed against the shutters while they sat close to the fire. Lottie stared into the flames and whispered, "They always said I'd never be wanted, that no one could ever love me, not like this." Thad turned his gaze to her, steady, unwavering. They were wrong. Her breath caught. The fire painted his face in shades of gold and shadow, and in his eyes she saw no pity, no mockery, only truth. Tears welled as she turned her face away, but Thad reached out, resting a calloused hand gently over hers. He didn't speak again, but the weight of his touch said everything her sister's words never had. "You are not too much. You are not too little. You are enough." That night, Lottie lay in the cabin's warmth, her heart fluttering with something fragile and new, hope. For weeks, life on Blackstone Mountain unfolded in quiet peace. Lottie grew stronger, her cheeks flushed with health, her laughter no longer a stranger to the cabin's walls. She had begun to think, against all odds, that her sister's words might finally fade, but the world below had not forgotten her. It began with a stranger's visit, a trapper passing through, who stopped for supper and spoke carelessly over a bowl of venison stew. "Town's buzzing about your sister," he said to Lottie with a chuckle. "Bride as pretty as a picture, but temper like a rattlesnake. Folks say she and her husband have been sniffing around about some claim up here." Thad's spoon stilled halfway to his mouth. His eyes flicked to Lottie, then back to the fire. "What claim?" The trapper shrugged. "Something about silver. Heard the name Blackwood tied to it. You might want to watch your back, friend." Lottie's stomach dropped. When the trapper left, the cabin's warmth suddenly felt fragile. She turned to Thad, voice trembling. "Is it true? About the silver?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he set his bowl down, folded his hands, and met her gaze. "My father owned land on this mountain. There's a vein of silver in it, rich enough to draw men with guns and greed. When he died, it passed to me. I never worked it. I wanted peace, not fortune." Lottie's heart twisted. Now she understood why Isabella and Reginald would suddenly take interest in her whereabouts. It wasn't about family or forgiveness. It was about Thad, about what he had. And yet, the seed of doubt Isabella had planted long ago began to stir again. What if Thad's kindness was nothing more than obligation? What if she was just a distraction, a way to ease the loneliness of a man hiding from the world? Those fears sharpened when, days later, Isabella herself appeared at the cabin door. She arrived in a sleigh trimmed with velvet, her new husband Reginald Pemberton at her side. Snow glittered on her fine cloak, her hair arranged in perfect curls despite the biting wind. She swept into the cabin with a smile as sharp as glass. "Charlotte," Isabella cooed, her voice dripping with fall sweetness. "Oh, how we worried for you. Mother has been beside herself. You ran away in such a state, I can only imagine the things you've endured." Lottie froze, torn between fury and longing. It was the first time her sister had spoken her name with anything resembling softness. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe after all this time that Isabella cared. Reginald stepped forward, his eyes calculating. "Dr. Blackwood," he said smoothly, extending a gloved hand. "I understand you have holdings on this mountain. Surely a man of your talents doesn't wish to waste them. My wife and I could help you manage them properly." Thad ignored the offered hand. "This is no place for games, Pemberton. Say what you came to say." Isabella's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of venom. "You think she belongs here, with you? Don't be absurd. Charlotte's family. She needs to come home." Lottie's chest tightened. "Home?" she whispered. "You told me no one would ever love me. You called me—" Her voice broke. Isabella's eyes narrowed. "I was angry, but you're still my sister. Do you truly believe this man cares for you? Look at you, Charlotte. Men don't fall in love with women like you. He pities you, nothing more." The words struck like a whip. Old wounds tore open. For a moment, the cabin spun. Thad's hand brushed hers under the table, steady and warm, but doubt flooded her heart. What if Isabella was right? When the pair finally left, the cabin felt colder than the snow outside. Lottie sat by the fire, her hands twisting in her lap, unable to meet Thad's eyes. He said nothing, giving her space. But later, when she thought he slept, she heard him murmur into the darkness, "If only she could see what I see." Lottie closed her eyes, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The mountain had given her peace, but her sister's poison had found its way back, and she feared it might destroy everything. The storm came at night, not of snow, but of men. Thad had gone to check the traps when the first shout echoed through the valley. By the time he returned, rifle slung over his shoulder, the cabin was already surrounded. Torches burned against the dark, casting jagged shadows on the snow. Lottie stood frozen at the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Come out, Blackwood!" a harsh voice roared. Silas Crane, the outlaw Reginald had hired, stepped forward with a sneer. "Hand over the girl and the claim, and maybe we'll let you live." Behind him, Isabella and Reginald watched from the safety of a sleigh, Isabella's face pale in the firelight, her eyes glittering with triumph. Lottie's heart pounded. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish. Instead, she turned and saw Thad, calm, steady, his rifle in his hands, his body a wall between her and the danger outside. He looked at her, just once. "Do you trust me?" Tears blurred her vision. For a heartbeat, Isabella's words clawed at her again. "No one will ever love you." But when she met Thad's eyes, she saw no pity, no hesitation, only truth. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." The first shot cracked through the night. Wood splintered from the cabin door. Thad pulled Lottie down behind the table as bullets slammed into the walls. He fired back with the precision of a soldier, each shot ringing like a vow. Lottie's fear turned to fire. She grabbed the pistol Thad had set by the hearth, her hands trembling but steadying as she aimed. When one outlaw burst through the shattered door, She fired. The man fell, and for the first time in her life, Lottie felt the strength of standing her ground. The fight raged until the sheriff's men, summoned by townsfolk who had seen the torches, arrived and scattered the outlaws. Silas Crane was dragged away in chains, cursing. Reginald tried to protest, but the sheriff cut him off with a sneer. "We've enough witnesses to hang you twice, Pemberton." Isabella, once the perfect bride, stood trembling in the snow, her beauty cracked by fear. She tried to call out to Lottie, but her voice was drowned by the jeers of townsfolk who had watched the betrayal unfold. When silence finally returned, the cabin lay battered but unbroken. Thad lowered his rifle, his chest heaving, and turned to Lottie. She was shaking, smoke in her hair, tears on her cheeks. He crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Lottie, listen to me. You are not a burden. You are not a shadow. You are my everything. Without you, this place is nothing but wood and stone." The dam inside her broke. She threw her arms around him, clinging as though the world might tear them apart again. His embrace was fierce, unyielding, and for the first time she believed him, truly believed him. The mountain had tested them, and together they had endured. The cabin smelled of smoke and gunpowder, but the fire still burned bright in the hearth. Snow whispered against the roof as if to hush the echoes of gunfire, wrapping the night in silence once more. Lottie sat curled on the bench, Thad's heavy coat draped over her shoulders. Her hands still trembled, but no longer from fear, only from the weight of what had passed. She lifted her eyes to him as he set aside his rifle and joined her by the fire. For a long time, neither spoke. The crackle of the flames and the low howl of the wind outside filled the silence. Then Thad reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. "You're safe now," he said simply. Her breath caught. 2 words, so ordinary, and yet they undid her. She blinked back tears, her lips curving into a trembling smile. "Safe? With you?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "If you'll stay, this can be your home. No matter what they say, no matter what comes." Her sister's voice no longer held power over her. The curses, the laughter, the cruelty, they all seemed smaller now, dwarfed by the truth in his eyes. For the first time, Lottie felt not just sheltered, but chosen. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder as the fire warmed their faces. Outside, the mountain stood silent and strong, a guardian to the life they were building. And yet, as peace settled around them, one thought flickered in her chest. Would the world beyond Blackstone Mountain ever accept what they had found here? The question hung in the quiet, unanswered. But for tonight, wrapped in his arms, Lottie no longer cared. Stories like Lottie and Thad's remind us that love is not measured by appearances, wealth, or perfection. It's measured by the courage to see one another's worth when the world refuses to. Every time I share a tale like this, I'm reminded how deeply we all long for safety, respect, and belonging. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Do you believe love this true still exists? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the next story may be the one that speaks straight to your heart.